Welcome my fellow weeaboos to my Bleach Strength and Power tier list. In this video, I'm going to be ranking all of the relevant Bleach characters based on how powerful they are. I reread the entire manga, taking notes, and thoroughly studied the Bleach universe and made this list with careful deliberation. So you can be sure this will be the most accurate Bleach ranking of this size on the internet. Due to how massive this series is, I'll be splitting it up into two parts. This part will cover up to Aizen's defeat, and the next part will cover the Fullbring and Thousand Year Blood War arcs. After that, I'll make a video that combines both lists for the ultimate Bleach Strength and Power tier list, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it. Starting off with the Soul Reaper tier, this tier contains characters on the level of an average non-seeded Soul Reaper and basic Hollow. Tatsuki won second place in a national karate tournament after having one of her arms broken by a car and was rumored to have crushed two biker gangs with only her left arm. Her spiritual pressure is higher than a regular human's, having some sensitivity to spirits and surviving Yami's soul-sucking attack that stripped the souls from regular humans. Koen is a mod soul with powerful legs that allow him to jump extremely high and tear metal like paper. He was designed to fight hollows, though he never finished off a hollow on his own. Karin, like Tatsuki, has high spiritual power for a human and can see spirits. She helped Don Kanonji, Jinta, and Uryu defeat a hollow, and in the anime she basically became a superhero. Don Kanonji has exceptionally strong spiritual power for a human, to the point he made a TV show about it. He's basically Bleach's version of Mr. Satan. But this old dog isn't all bark, as he was able to help Ichigo against the hollow, blocking its bite and releasing Ichigo's sword that got stuck in a ceiling. In a bonus story placed across the end of multiple manga chapters, Kanonji can be seen shooting down a flying hollow. Hanataro is a member of 4th Company, which is the weakest division of Soul Reapers in terms of combat as they focus on healing. That doesn't make him completely useless in combat though. He knocked out a Soul Reaper with a tranquilizer liquid called Shinten, and his Shikai can release the wounds of those he's healed as damage onto others. The hollow numb chandelier doesn't like to fight, so it shoots out seeds that lets it control the victims it penetrates. While Tatsuki was able to put up a fight at first, she was overwhelmed by the sheer number of controlled students. Tatsuki also tried to bite it, and while that hurt it a bit, the hollow was still too much for her. Fishbone D is the hollow that started it all. It has the power to smash through walls, and was able to damage Rukia when she was off guard, and took her out of commission when she jumped in to save Ichigo. The Demi-Hollow gave a more experienced Ichigo a harder time due to its sticker phlegm that glued Ichigo's hands together, though Ichigo was hindered due to the tight space they were in. Kuruma Dani is the Soul Reaper of Katakura Town, who I have representing the average Soul Reaper. An average Soul Reaper should be able to beat low-level Hollows. Shrieker defeated 2 Soul Reapers, so he should go above the average Shinigami. He was able to accomplish this with the help of his little minions that shoot out leeches that explode when Shrieker vibrates his tongue. Rukia, after giving most of her power to Ichigo, was powerless against him, though Chad was able to beat him back. Bulbous G proved he was physically stronger than Shrieker, as Chad was physically no match for him, though Shrieker can fly, so the weaker Hollow could still win if he stays to the sky and abuses his detonation ability. Acid Wire could knock Ichigo around and shoot acid that burnt his hands. His scales made it harder for Ichigo to cut through him, and he even took a hit to the face despite that being a Hollow's weak spot. Once Ichigo was locked in, he was able to cut Acid Wire up, though he didn't actually finish him off. Acid Wire passed on voluntarily. Orihime, after gaining her powers, was able to easily defeat Numb Chandelier. She has the ability to block attacks, heal others, and send out powerful ranged attacks. Physically, she's not too shabby either, as she was able to knock out 2 Soul Reapers with karate she learned from Tatsuki. Chad said she lacked combat skills, so she was definitely the weakest in the group. Orihime actually gets stronger than this, however, she never really properly fights again after the Soul Society arc, so I didn't place her later versions on here. Though I suspect during the Elevencore arc she would go in the tier above. Aramaki is a member of the 11th Company, which is a squad with an affinity for battle, so he's likely stronger than the average Soul Reaper. He was able to take Orihime against her will and KO her when she tried to fight back, despite her having far stronger spiritual pressure than him. Chad had incredible physical strength for a human, being able to snap the post of a telephone pole and use the dang thing as a weapon to smash Shrieker. His body was also tough enough to block a falling steel beam. After unlocking his right arm of the giant, he was able to easily defeat Bulbous G. Grand Fisher is a powerful Hollow that outwit and outfought Soul Reapers for 54 years. He was able to give Ichigo an extremely difficult fight that basically ended in a draw, though Grand Fisher used multiple underhanded tactics such as using Ichigo's mother's form and surprise attacks. Uryu at the start of the series was able to easily take out a bunch of Hollows and rivaled Ichigo during that time. Ichigo, once gaining Soul Reaper powers from Rukia, started out stronger than most Hollows and even rivaled stronger ones like Grand Fisher. As he learned to control his powers, they grew stronger, and he even managed to fight off a Menos Grande, blocking its arrow and doing decent damage to it. Initially, Ichigo was getting beaten up by Renji, who didn't believe Ichigo could hurt a Menos, but Ichigo's Ryatsu spiked and he was able to get the better of Renji, who was using Shikai, though Renji was under Gentei Kaijo, which made him 5 times weaker than normal. Ichigo doesn't have good control of his Ryatsu, which is why his power is so variable. Ranking up to the seated officer tier, this tier is for characters on par with seated officers. Metastasia is a holo modified by Aizen that managed to kill Cayenne's wife, who was a 3rd seed, and wipe out her entire squad. It later killed Cayenne himself, who was a lieutenant. It was able to do this as once the night, whoever is the first to touch its tentacles has their Zanpakuto destroyed. Even still, Cayenne was holding his own until Metastasia invaded his body. So Metastasia is near equals to a lieutenant without their sword, stronger than a 3rd seat without their sword, and stronger than a group of regular Shinigami even with their swords, placing him solidly in this tier. However, he should still be weaker than any Menos Grande, and if he came across a seated officer who could still use their sword, he would be screwed, which is basically what happened as he was killed by Rukia, who is stated to be seated officer level. Lilynette is an Arankar that can shoot Seros, so she's most likely a step above a normal holo, but it's confirmed her Seros are not as powerful as a Menos's, likely referring to a Gillian's. Menos Grande are holos formed from hundreds of ordinary holos, and Royal Special Task Forces have to deal with them. They're way beyond the ability of a regular Soul Reaper. Gillians are the lowest rank of Menos, and Captain Class Soul Reapers can easily defeat them, but regular holos and Soul Reapers are still ants compared to them. Ichigo and Uryu could barely phase a single Gillian until Ichigo figured out how to better control his spiritual pressure. Ajukas are the next step of Menos, and while smaller than Gillians, they're more intelligent and dangerous. The Menos that attacked the depowered Uryu had instant regeneration and was actually made up of 2 holos. To be honest, I don't know if they're Ajukas or Gillians, but either way, they're probably still above a standard Gillian. Jirobo is the 4th seed of Division 7. Given the title of Kamaitachi, which is the mark of the ultimate weapons master. The blades of his Shikai can move through the air quicker than the eye can see, and Orihime was no match for him. Tatsufuso was the 3rd seed of 8th division, and apparently his swordplay had never been breached, at least until Chad. Ichigo, after unlocking his Shikai, was almost definitely stronger than a Gillian, but Kisuke still said his power was only 3rd or 4th seed at best, which puts these seeded officers at least over a Gillian. Jidanbo is the older brother of Jirobo and takes being the big brother to the next level. With his legendary strength, he can kill 30 holos with one swing of his axe, as well as fold pavement in on itself to form a defensive barrier, which Uryu thought was incredible. Even Yoruichi called him extremely strong. Before Ichigo, it had been decades since anyone blocked his axe, and nobody's ever stopped his second swing. Ichigo was his first loss, though Jidanbo was actually probably physically stronger than Ichigo at that time, as he was able to open the massive gate to the Serite, where Ichigo seemingly couldn't. Gin called him Soul Society's strongest giant, and he proved this when he defeated one of the other gatekeepers with a single punch. These guys are big enough to crush buildings, by the way. Ganju was able to put up a better fight against Ichigo than Jidanbo did, so I put him higher. He was also able to get the better of Yumichika, who has lieutenant level strength, though he was getting his butt kicked throughout the fight and only won via outsmarting him and using a firework. Kukaku is Ganju's older sister and seems stronger than him. She was able to defeat one of the giant gatekeepers with a single Hado 63, though she used the full incantation. She could be higher, though this is the most her feats get her. Chad, during the Soul Society arc, was taking out groups of Soul Reapers, and was able to one-shot the 3rd seat Tatsufusa. He could shoot destructive energy blasts from his fist, which prior to his training with Yoruichi, he could only do 2 a day, but now he can do 5 or more without getting exhausted. Chad was so strong, Ichigo couldn't even imagine him losing. Uryu's secret training prior to the Soul Society arc paid off as he was able to easily beat the 4th seat Jirobo. Even Captain Kurotsuchi was somewhat impressed by him and utilized Nemo to get the better of him. Though Uryu couldn't even keep track of Kurotsuchi, and the captain said he decided to kill Uryu with the least effort possible. Due to this, I don't think Ishida is that close to the mad scientist. But having Kurotsuchi worry about having to put in any effort at all is a feat in itself. D-Roy's an Arankar that was about to one-shot kill Chad, though Chad wasn't done being healed and was taken off guard. He was able to contend with base Rukia, who had gotten her Soul Reaper powers back, but once she brought out her Shikai, he was handily defeated. Nakim impressed Rangiku with his speed and was able to get the better of her while she was at 1/5 strength from Gentei Kaijo. I ranked him over D-Roy as D-Roy was implied to be the weakest of Grimjaw's Fraction. In a flashback, we see Nakim was only a Gillian, while D-Roy and Grimjaw's other Fractions looked like Ajukas. However, it's stated all of them are actually Gillians, so that can't be used to argue Nakim under D-Roy. Yumichika is the 5th seed of Division 11, but that's only because he thinks 5 is a more beautiful number than 4. But really, he has the strength of a lieutenant. However, he restricts himself by not using his sword's full capabilities, so this spot represents his base and restricted Shikai form. Even in base, Ganju said Yumichika's Ryatsu is way too much for Ichigo, and Ichigo was stronger than Uryu and Chad at that time, so that should scale Yumichika above those two. Base Charlotte was clashing evenly with Yumichika, but when he got serious, he was able to break Yumichika's arm in 3 places. Despite this, Yumichika was still able to fight back, and Charlotte called him a rival and acknowledged him as an equal. Edrad in base was having an extremely close fight with base Ikaku that could have probably gone either way, which is why Edrad felt compelled to transform. Ikaku was the 3rd seed of Squad 11 and the 2nd strongest man in the squad after only Kenpachi himself. He was able to make Shikai Ichigo bleed and force Edrad to transform. Despite his rank, he's on par with a lieutenant, but this spot only represents his base form. Most lieutenants not releasing their Shikai probably go right around here as well. Ilfort in just his base was able to beat up Bankai Renji at 1/5 power from Gentei Kaijo. Bankai stated to amplify a Soul Reaper's combat power by 5 to 10 times, so Bankai Gentei Kaijo Renji is likely at least around his full power base self, who's stronger than Ikkaku. Though a 5 to 10 times boost in combat ability shouldn't be confused with the 5 to 10 times boost in power. Some Bankai don't even necessarily amplify strength and speed. For example, Tosen's, which just takes away people's senses. Getting promoted to the low lieutenant tier, this tier is for characters on the level of the average lieutenant using their Shikai. Loli was able to cut Yami's hand, and in her release state, she has poison that can dissolve things or centipede-like tentacles touch. Demora and Icelinger are Ronkars that abandon their human forms in exchange for power. They were able to give a Ronkar Arc Uryu and Chad trouble, but when they switched opponents for a better matchup, Uryu and Chad easily won. Uru in Massacre mode was able to easily beat up base Ilfort, but got instantly defeated by transformed Ilfort, placing her in the tier between them. Uru in just her regular mode has Soul Reaper level combat skills and can defeat multiple hollows at once. Her strikes are like dynamite, and Ichigo without his Soul Reaper power stood no chance against her, though he did manage to dodge her and make her bleed. Honorable mention to Jinta, who's stronger than basic hollows, but was impressed by Ichigo beating Amenos. He seems to be stronger than Kon, and he bullies Uru on a regular basis, but that's mostly due to her timid nature. Momo is Lieutenant of Squad 5 and Aikido Master. Her skills impressed Rangiku, and she was able to give Hallibel's Fraction issues, though she admitted she was weaker than them. Nirge in base was beating 2nd Company Lieutenant Omaida, then transformed to increase his strength even further at the sacrifice of some speed. But it turned out Omaida was sandbagging to make him drop his guard. Nirge recovered from Omaida's Shikai attack and surprise grabbed him with his trunk, but was taken out by fellow Arrancar Gio by accident. In the manga, that's where the fight ends, but in the anime, Nirge comes back for more and Omaida wins on his own, which is why I put Omaida above him. Ikkaku using his Shikai was able to give early Soul Society Ichigo a decent fight and stalemate Lieutenant Iba, proving he himself is lieutenant level. That's really Iba's only noteworthy feat, so I have him as one of the weaker lieutenants, but he's likely above Momo, who's considered a weakling among the lieutenants, and Omaida, who's a buffoon. Abirama has steel feathers as heavy as boulders that can smash through Kira's Kido and walls alike. His wings have the power to blast away tornadoes and collapse buildings. Lieutenant Kira of 3rd Company managed to defeat him with his Shikai that doubles the weight of anything he cuts, and the ability stacks. Rangiku, the lieutenant of Squad 10, fought Kira and initially had difficulty after her sword was made to weigh 225 pounds, but defeated her fellow vice captain after she released her Shikai, which turned her sword to ash. Hallibel's Fraction, Apache, Mila, Rose, and Sunsun were too much for Rangiku, and Apache thought she could defeat Matsumoto on her own. This placement only counts their base forms, as they never directly fight in their release states. Renji using his Shikai is a decent amount stronger than Shikai Ikkaku, as he gave Ichigo a much harder fight. Ichigo, after unlocking Shikai, created a massive crevice in the ground and would have apparently taken Kisuke's arm off had he not blocked it with his Shield of Blood Mist. However, Ichigo could not yet control that power, and without it was only 3rd or 4th seat level at best. With the power under control, he would be able to contend with Soul Reaper officers, which he did when he defeated Renji. Even before tapping into that power again, he was able to easily beat Jidambo and defeat Ikkaku. Runu Ganga is made of sand and can form himself back together after Ichigo's Getsuga. Uryu and Chad don't think they can take him out either. However, his weakness is water, so Rukia was able to take him out, which is why the next two are ahead of him. Technically, there are characters in the tier above that wouldn't be able to take him out, but this spot represents how strong he is if someone is actually able to counter his sand body. Kaien Shiba was the lieutenant with a water Zanpakuto. We don't get to see much of him, but we see Aranjero use his power to fight Rukia. This spot doubles for Aranjero's base form while utilizing Kaien's powers. Rukia with her Ice Shikai and Mastery of Kido was able to fight against base Aranjero using Kaien's powers and seemed confident she could win when she was sure Aranjero wasn't actually her former comrade. Aranjero responded to this by releasing, so Rukia likely wasn't wrong. And she even ended up defeating released Aranjero, though that was only because Aranjero dropped his guard thinking he had already won. Next up, the High Lieutenant tier is for characters on the level of top level lieutenants. This is also the baseline level needed to be considered for promotion to captain. Findor started off fighting Hisagi with the strength of a 5th seat, then worked his way up to 4th seat, 3rd seat, then lieutenant. At this point, he's already beating base Hisagi, who he claims isn't even the level of a lieutenant. Then he transformed and powered up even more on top of that, claiming to have reached captain level. Due to this, I think he has to be a level above baseline lieutenants. Charlotte, after transforming, was completely dominating Yubi Chika before the reveal of his true Shikai. Charlotte claimed he was Baragon's top Fraction, but based on performance, I doubt this to be true. Yumi Chika with his true Shikai sends out vines that suck out the spiritual energy of his opponent. He was able to defeat both base Hisagi and release Charlotte with it. Edrad in his resurrection could easily crush Shikai Ikkaku and create multi-city block-sized blasts. Ikkaku using Bankai was able to defeat released Edrad, but they both went down, and Ikkaku's Bankai also got damaged, so I put him one spot above. His Bankai doesn't enhance his Kido, speed, or defensive ability, it's just a huge chunk of energy with tremendous destructive power, and it takes a while to warm up to full power. Due to his Bankai, it was stated he could be a captain, which is one of the reasons I said this tier is baseline captain level. Ilford in his release state was able to immediately impale Uryu, which points to him being a tier above her, but he was instantly defeated by Renji's Bankai, which makes it seem like he should go a tier under him. However, Renji admitted this was only due to Ilford getting thrown off from Renji suddenly going Gentei Kaijo, and that if they had an all-out fight from the very beginning, he's not sure who would have won. Bankai Renji should almost definitely beat Bankai Ikkaku, so I think this should put Ilford above Ikkaku as well. Xiaolong was clearly the strongest of Grimmjow's Fraction and had the edge over Bankai Hitsugaya when restrained by Gentei Kaijo in just his base. Then he released and was really putting in work on Hitsugaya. But after Gentei Kaijo was released, Hitsugaya quickly won. This makes it pretty clear Xiaolong's release state is less than 5 times stronger than his base. You could be generous and say it was close to 5 times if we assume that, like with Ilford, he could have put up a much better fight had he not been taken off guard by the Gentei Kaijo release. Gantenbein was a pre-Verona Espada, meaning he was an ex-Espada. This means he had to have been stronger than all of the other Arrancar that were non-Espada during his reign. Xiaolong was Espada 11, which makes him one of the oldest Arrancar that basically had to have existed when Gantenbein was an Espada, scaling Gantenbein above him. Chiruchi was Arrancar 105, while Gantenbein was Arrancar 107, meaning Chiruchi was likely ex-Espada 5 and Gantenbein was ex-Espada 7, which would make her stronger. She also did better against Uryu than Gantenbein did against Chad, and I believe Uryu and Chad are comparable. Speaking of those two, they're next. In preparation for going to Hueco Mundo, Chad trained with Bankai Renji, and it was stated that the person who trains him needs to have the power of Bankai, and he made Bankai Renji sweat, easily putting him in this tier. Chad's right arm was amazingly powerful, but it was revealed that it was just a defensive power, and he unlocked the power of his left arm, which was his offensive power. With this new power, he was able to easily take down Gantenbein. Uryu during the Arrancar arc was able to fire 1,200 arrows at once and defeated Chiruchi with the help of his Sealish Schneider, which is essentially an energy sword. With his Springen, he was able to damage base Xyla Poro, and this was after Xyla Poro already analyzed his Ryatsu to minimize damage taken from him. Uryu noted that due to the concentration of ambient reishi, as a Quincy he should be stronger in Hueco Mundo than in the Living World or Soul Society. However, he says the same is true for the Arrancars and Soul Reapers, so rather than give any one of them an advantage, it could be an explanation on why some of the feats performed in Hueco Mundo seemed more impressive. Tesla in just his base form was able to block an injured Chad's punch with all of his remaining strength held in that one blow. And it was implied it could have even done something to Noitora had it landed, despite Noitora tanking a blow earlier. In his release state, Tesla was able to crush Bankai Ichigo's bones like toothpicks, though Ichigo was already heavily damaged and fatigued. When a fresh Kenpachi showed up, he got one shot. Gio was able to fight against a holding back Soifone, and in the manga was the one to accidentally take out Nirge. He also destroyed Omaida's Shikai and was seemingly about to end him before Soifone stepped in. Considering he was one of Espada 2's top Fraction and was 2-shot rather than 1-shot by a captain, I think he should go above Tesla. However, I don't think he's the strongest of Baragon's Fraction. Pao in his base form was able to easily beat Shikai Ikkaku, take a punch from Captain Komamura, and punched him right back. Just seeing that was enough for Iba to admit he and Ikkaku wouldn't stand a chance against him. Pao then transformed into his Resurrection and became a giant. Komamura went Bankai to finish him off, while it only took Shikai to defeat Gio, which is why I decided Pao was the strongest of Baragon's Fraction. Base Hisagi was easily beating base Yumi Chika, but was considered not even lieutenant level by Findor, so his base form would likely be around the bottom of the low lieutenant tier. However, in Shikai, he was able to beat Findor using his supposed captain level strength, and he did it easily. He also landed the finishing blow on Kaname in his release state. Hisagi did this while Kaname was off guard, but he was still able to react to Hollowified Kaname's attack, so Hisagi's no joke. Renji using his Bankai was able to contend with Shikai Byakuya to the point his captain decided to use his own Bankai to defeat him. Pesce and Dodon Chaka were Hollybal's Fraction and since that time trained to reach a whole other level. Pesce was able to cut release Xyla Poro with his sword, and Dodon Chaka was able to smash creatures that were able to tank attacks from Bankai Renji and Uryu. Together, their Seros and Critico was so powerful that Xyla Poro admitted it would have defeated him had they used it right off the bat and not given him time to analyze them. Ichigo, after powering up in his fight with Kenpachi and borrowing power from Zangetsu, was able to have a stalemate with the captain, destroying multiple large buildings in their clash. This also means Kenpachi in his weakest state would be right around here as well, which is another reason why I said this was baseline captain tier. It's also stated at this time Ichigo's spiritual pressure is so high it could only belong to a captain. He then trains with Yororichi where his combat skills improve at an astonishing rate, but his spiritual pressure doesn't improve much at all. It's also stated he has no major improvements, but is developing steadily. Due to this, I think post Yororichi Shikai Ichigo is only slightly better than he was when he defeated Kenpachi. This Ichigo stopped the Sokyoku, which is said to have the destructive power of 1 million Zanpakuto with his single Zanpakuto, though it was implied he wouldn't have been able to stop it a second time, and Shunsui and Ukitake stepped in to stop it. Ichigo then blitzed and stomped Lieutenants Chojuro, Omaida, and Isane, who all had their Shikais activated while not even using his own sword, breaking Omaida's Shikai with his bare fist. After this, Ichigo fought Byakuya, where he revealed he could now use Getsuga Tensho at will for the first time, and learning its name has made it even stronger. His Getsuga made Byakuya bleed, and Byakuya even went Bankai when Ichigo asked him to. Shikai Ichigo performed better against both Shikai and Bankai Byakuya better than Bankai Renji did. And I don't think Bankai Renji would have been able to beat Eyepatchless Kenpachi even in his weakest state, so I think Ichigo even in just his Shikai surpassed Bankai Renji. Finally, getting to the part you all are most interested in, the Captain tiers. The low Captain tier is for characters on par with the weaker captains in Espada. Rudabone was able to defeat base Dordoni, who was stronger than Arrancar Arc Shikai Ichigo, and then later clashed with Bankai Ichigo and was starting to overwhelm him with his minions. Rudabone's power is to create those minions, so their fighting power counts as his own. In the anime, he's able to fight Bankai Renji, Rukia, and Chad at the same time. He admits the current Espada are all stronger than him, and base Yami's able to smash him after Rukia froze him up. Dordoni was Arrancar 103 and the strongest of the Privarone Espada. In just his base form, he was beating Arrancar Arc Shikai Ichigo, though Ichigo still thought he had a chance in Shikai, so he would probably go at the top of the High Lieutenant tier. In his release date, he was strong enough to fight Bankai Ichigo, though clearly inferior. He even got Ichigo to bring out his holification power to put him down. Hiyori was an ex-lieutenant and a visored, meaning she can holify and increase her power. In her holified state, she was able to overpower post-Soul Society Arc Shikai Ichigo, even cracking his sword, clearly demonstrating she's a level above him. When White took over, he was able to overpower Hiyori, but Hiyori was later seen training a masked Shikai Ichigo and was getting the better of him. With her Shikai activated on top of her mask, she was able to help in the fight against released Holybell. Mashiro is another ex-lieutenant turned visored and could keep her mask on longer than any of the other visors. She was able to one-shot the giant hollow Hulir, which could spit out groups of Menos Grande, so it's likely at least a tier above them. She also temporarily beat on base Wonderweiss. Lisa, like the former two, is an ex-lieutenant turned visored who was able to fight for 10 minutes against an uncontrolled Bankai holified Ichigo without using her Shikai or mask. While she was losing, this still makes it seem like she should be a tier above Hiyori. However, all of the visoreds, even Hiyori, were taking turns fighting this version of Ichigo. The only explanation I can think of is this mindless version of Ichigo is weaker than when White is in full control. Lisa was also able to fight against release Holybell, but as I mentioned, Hiyori joined in too, so I think they're more likely in the same tier rather than in separate tiers. Junsui did say Lisa is stronger than Hiyori, so I put her higher. Wonderweiss in his base form was almost able to get the drop on Kisuke and even kind of tagged him with a bala. He did end up blitzing and shoving his hand through Ukitake, though Ukitake was kind of taken off guard because he wasn't expecting Wonderweiss to go after him all of a sudden. The reason I put base Wonderweiss in this tier is because he was getting his butt kicked by masked Mashiro. She couldn't maintain her form long enough to win, which is why I think he's above the visoreds below. Base Kensei was also getting the better of him when he stepped in, which is more evidence base Wonderweiss would be in this tier rather than the one above. Wonderweiss did seemingly break Holybell out of Hitsugai's ice with a scream, but that feat's not really scalable and an argument could be made Holybell broke herself out after hearing Wonderweiss's scream, which I'll get into later. The nail in the coffin is that Kubo in a club outside statement said Wonderweiss's hero is weaker than all of the Espadas, which means his skin is less hard/durable than every Espada's. So based on this, his low-end feats, and his mindlessness, I think he should go below all of the Espadas, at least while in base. Yami in his base form is Espada 10, the weakest of the Espada, which are ranked numerically based on lethality. Even in this state, Hitsugai admitted he couldn't beat him without Bankai, and Yoruichi injured herself beating on him because his skin was so hard. Uryu's arrow couldn't go through his skin either. Bankai Ichigo did manage to cut his arm off, but it was made clear Yami underestimated Ichigo, and even after having his arm cut off, Yami thought he could win if he pulled his sword out. And Ukiyor even made fun of him for having to use a sword against Ichigo. Due to all of this, Yami should definitely be in this tier rather than the one below. Aranjiro as Espada 9 should be stronger than base Yami. He stated Aghelion doesn't possess the abilities necessary to be an Espada, but was given this rank because he's the only Arrancar with unlimited evolutionary potential, as he can take on the powers of those he consumes. This makes it sound like he might be weaker than even Yami. However, he was saying this while in base, and this would line up with how his base form is in the low lieutenant tier. But when he transforms, he says not to mistake the release of an Espada with that of a common Arrancar, and that he can employ the powers of all 33,650 hollows he consumed. In this form, he should be stronger than Yami and was able to break Rukia's Shikai and pierce her, only going down himself due to his own hubris. Xyloporo is Espada 8, making him stronger than Aranjiro, though he admitted himself he's not much of a fighter. In base form, he was able to beat Shikai Renji, who admitted Xyloporo was stronger than him, and the Espada also said he was stronger than Uryu. However, Xyloporo made sure Renji couldn't use his Bankai against him and analyzed their spiritual powers ahead of time to counter them. So his base form's raw power without prep time is probably actually in the tier below. In his release date, he can make clones of his enemies that seem to replicate their powers as well as create voodoo dolls to crush his enemies with his fingertips. Literally. He was instantly defeated by Kurotsuchi's Bankai, but was able to rebirth himself out of Nemu by planting an egg in her. Kurotsuchi is the captain of the 12th Division with a Bankai that sprays lethal poison in a 180 meter radius. To avoid dying to Uryu, he turned himself into a liquid that could not be harmed. In preparation for his fight with Xyloporo, he switched out all of his tendons and organs with dummies, and won the fight using a drug that slowed Xyloporo's perception of time. Uryu, using his Let's Still transformation, was able to defeat Kurotsuchi even when he was using his Bankai, though this strength came at the cost of his powers. He could have killed Kurotsuchi if he went for his head. Ichigo using his Bankai is extremely fast to the point Byakuya could barely keep up with him, and he could swat away all of Byakuya's millions of blades coming at him. Despite getting his butt kicked by Grimmjow in their first fight, his Getsugo was still strong enough to permanently scar the Espada's chest. And by their final fight, Ichigo's Bankai was able to go blow for blow with base Grimmjow, who's next. Grimmjow was Espada 6, and in his first encounter with Ichigo, he called his Bankai speed average and proceeded to kick his ass with his bare hands. Losing an arm made him drop out of the Espada, but Ichigo still chose to use his mask to try and finish him off, but couldn't do it in time and got his butt kicked again. Even in their final fight, Grimmjow seemed to have the slight edge over Bankai Ichigo, which is why I have him in the spot above. Nell was the past Espada 3, however the Espadas have gotten stronger since then, so that rank is no longer representative of her power. She was able to beat number 5 Espada Noitora in the past, and gave him a good fight in the present. However, she felt the need to release against base Noitora, which is why I placed her base form below his. Tosin was former captain of the 9th Division and easily chopped off and destroyed base Grimmjow's arm, which is why I placed him higher than him. His Bankai can take away the sight, sound, smell, and ability to sense spiritual pressure from those ensnared inside of it, which is a huge disadvantage for pretty much anyone that's not a psycho like Kenpachi. I don't think those below would be able to counter this. Noritora, on the other hand, is the hardest hero among the Espada, which would make him extremely difficult for Tosin to damage, and on top of having a massive weapon he can swing around and get a lucky hit with, he performed better against the stronger Kenpachi even while in base form, which is the form this spot represents. Zomari was Espada 7 and had the fastest Onito of the Espada that can create up to 5 afterimages. In his release state, he can take control of anything he sets his eyes on, and considering how many eyes he has, this is a devastating power. Each eye can control a different object, and if he lands a mark on someone's head, he can take control of their entire body. He managed to take control of Byakuya's foot and arm, forcing the captain to disable his own limbs. This spot includes his release state, which is why I have him above Noritora, who was just in his base state, and I don't see how Noritora would counter this power. A fight with Tosin would depend on if Zomari can still use his power while blind. As he has so many eyes, he would probably still tag Tosin even if he can't see him. Lupi was the replacement Espada 6 after Grimmjow got his arm cut off, so this should put him above Zomari, as this placement also includes his release state. Though this begs the question, why wasn't Lupi already an Espada? Base Lupi was able to easily beat Yumichika, and in his release state he could beat Yumichika, Ikaku, and Rangiku at the same time. He even initially overpowered Bankai Hitsugaya when he took him off guard with his extra arms. After Grimmjow got his arm back, he was able to stab it through Lupi and blow him away with his arrow. Due to that, I think while in the same form, Grimmjow should be a tier above Lupi, which is why Lupi stayed down in this tier. Zomari's power is pretty deadly, and I could see arguments for him being in the tier above, but Byakuya was adamant they were not on the same level. So I'll go with what he said along with the official Espada rankings. Next up, the mid-captain tier, which is for the average captain level combatant. Ione is a monster created by the Tres Bestias. This beast was able to easily crush lieutenants even in a group, and Yamamoto had to step in to take him down. Soifone is captain of the 2nd Division, and in her base form was getting the better of base Yoruichi, though Yoruichi was rusty. Her Shika results in instant death to any target she hits in the same spot twice, and coupled with her elite level speed, this makes her extremely dangerous. She can also use Shunko to increase her physical prowess, though at this point she has not mastered it yet. Even with all of this, she would still actually probably be in the tier below. But what gets her into this tier is her Bankai, which is essentially a massive bazooka with the firepower to damage top tier Espada. She usually can only use her Bankai once every 3 days, but she managed to squeeze out 2 uses in 1 day. Her Bankai's limited usage is what keeps her near the bottom of this tier. Hachi was the lieutenant of the Kido Corps, turned visored, and has mastery of Kido up to the 90s. Using Sealing Kido, he could restrain Holified Kensei and Mashiro. He took out more Gillians than any of the other visors. His Kido Castle was able to withstand and contain the power of Soifone's Bankai, and he's the one who dealt the finishing blow to Baragon, so I think he deserves to be in this tier. Honorable mention to Tessai, who as captain of the Kido Corps was likely stronger than Hachi, though maybe you could argue Hachi with his mask surpassed him. Base Ulquiorra could bitch slap base Yami into place and slap away one of Kisuke's Shikai attacks like nothing. Bankai Ichigo was completely helpless against him, and only with his mask could he hope to defend himself. Base Grimmjow got his arm hurt trying to defend against Ulquiorra and had to use a special item to banish Ulquiorra to the Shadow Realm. Base Hallibel had the physical edge over Bankai Hitsugaya, and as a Espada 3, she should be more powerful than base Ulquiorra. Base Baragon was able to cause Soifone's attacks to slow down and age her bones to the point they broke with just a touch. Soifone and Omaeda stood no chance against him and couldn't even make him take one step back, which is why I think he has to be a tier above Soifone when not using her Bankai. As Espada 2, he scales above Holybell. Base Stark was able to blitz away Orihime from Kenpachi and Bankai Ichigo, though Kenpachi was damaged from his fight with Noritora. His power was about equivalent to base Kyoraku, and as Espada 1, he goes above Baragon. Kensei was an ex-captain turned visored, and in his base form stopped Wonder Weiss from attacking Mashiro and knocked the Arankar back. He also stepped in to beat on uncontrolled Bankai Hollow Mask Ichigo when he was about to get the better of Lisa. Add in Kensei's Bankai and or Hollow Mask, and he should definitely go a tier above Lisa and Mashiro. Rose is another captain turned visored that was able to fight Release Stark. Same goes for Love, but he put in more work against Stark and was even knocking the Espada back without his mask on. Stark admitted regular Ceros aren't strong enough to hurt Love or Rose, and called them tough. Since the only attack base Stark showed were base Ceros, I think the visored captains have to go above him. When the uncontrolled Ichigo was in his hollow-fied state and prepared to shoot a Cero, Rose said even Love would have to hollow-fight to repel an attack like that, which makes it sound like Rose is conceding Love is stronger than himself. This also would imply that full hollow-fied Ichigo is a stronger Cero than Stark, since even released Stark's base Cero was repelled by an unhollow-fied Love. Though Love did have his Shikai out against Stark, but not Ichigo. Hollow-fied Tosen claimed to be above the Espada in the anime, but since Tosen still has his Resurrection, this only means his base hollow-fied state has to be above the base Espada. He also believed the measly Bankai can't defeat him and has high-speed regeneration. Komamura was captain of the 7th Division and impressed Kenpachi by breaking the ground with just the air pressure of his sword. He also had the strength to flip Giant Pow. His Bankai could one-shot Pow and had the power to crumple the arm of Hollow-fied Tosen. He has the power edge over Hollow-fied Tosen, but Tosen has regeneration, so a fight between them could go either way. Komamura's Shikai clashed evenly with Love's when both went after Aizen, so they're likely comparable in power. In an anime filler arc, Komamura's Bankai had an even clash with Soifone's Bankai, and Komamura's Bankai doesn't have a use limit, so that should put him above her. Soifone also had to use Shunko just to compete with Shikai Komamura. Hitsugaya is captain of the 10th Company with the ultimate Ice-type Zanpakuto. He was able to hold his own in a scuffle with Gin, and with his Bankai he was able to easily defeat Release Loopy once he got a little prep time. Even more impressively, he was able to fight Released Holybell in a 1v1. What's crazy is he actually got the better of her, freezing her in a giant structure of ice. This made me consider putting Hitsugaya above Released Holybell, however this technique was supposed to be fatal, and she came out of it just fine. It seems Wonder Weiss might have had to break her out, but in that scene we also got the reveal Baragon wasn't defeated by Soifone's Bankai. So rather than Wonder Weiss breaking Holybell out and it being revealed Baragon wasn't defeated, the intent might have been to show that both of these top Espada were not defeated and too powerful for a Soul Reaper's Bankai to defeat on their own. The top 4 Espada are all confirmed to be Vasto Lorde, the strongest type of Hollow, which were hyped up to be even stronger than captains. In the anime, after breaking out, Holybell fights against Bankai Hitsugaya, Lisa, and Hiyori at the same time, though in the manga Hitsugaya is in his Shikai. Released Holybell being a level above Bankai Toshiro lines up better with basically everything other than this one feat, so that's the way I have it. At best, Toshiro actually won, but it was just because he had a technique that specifically worked well against Holybell, and Hitsugaya admitted it was a technique he wasn't sure he could handle yet. Byakuya is the 6th Division captain with spiritual pressure at least as great as Soul Society arc as Araki's. While clearly holding back, he was contending with Bankai Renji without even using Bankai himself. Once he used Bankai, he easily defeated Renji. Bankai Byakuya seemed like he was on the same level as Bankai Ichigo in the Soul Society arc, but Byakuya was very arrogant, not thinking Ichigo would be a challenge. His heart really wasn't in it because deep down he didn't want to kill Rukia, got beat up by Hollow Mask Ichigo for part of the fight, and at the end he was still able to flash step away from the fight and come back later to protect Rukia from Gin. On the other hand, Ichigo after the fight had to hold himself up with his sword. It's possible Byakuya was in the tier below in the Soul Society arc but got stronger by the Arankar arc, but a multi-100-year-old Shinigami growing that much in such a short time is unlikely. There's a theory that Ichigo actually becomes weaker from the Soul Society arc to the Arankar arc, but this comes from a mix of misunderstanding certain statements. The narrative is very clear that Ichigo keeps getting stronger, not that he becomes massively weaker for an entire arc without it ever being clearly stated. In his fight with Zomari, it's confirmed Byakuya holds back techniques due to pride. In a filler arc, Byakuya countered the technique Hitsugaya used to defeat Holybell, so if you want to highball him, you can say Byakuya goes above Holybell. Byakuya was presented as a rival to Kenpachi when they were beating up Release Yami, which is another thing that could point to him being a tier up. However, Kenpachi still had his eye patch on at the time, and Byakuya wasn't doing significant damage to Yami while Kenpachi was cutting limbs off, so I think this tier is more appropriate. If Byakuya was really that strong, his fight with Ichigo wouldn't make much sense. Grimmjow in his release state was able to have a good fight with Hollow-fied Bankai Ichigo. He could shoot out multiple attacks that could destroy large structures, and has an attack more powerful than even a Gran Ray Cero, which could already distort space. Grimmjow fought a stronger version of Hollow-fied Ichigo better than Byakuya, and Aizen set Ichigo up to fight stronger and stronger opponents as he himself grew stronger, so this should place Grimmjow above Byakuya. Ichigo's Hollification while in Bankai proved too much for Byakuya, and once he could maintain the form properly, he was able to defeat Grimmjow. Base Ulquiorra was overpowered by him, even causing his sword to crack, which is why I think Release Grimmjow is stronger than base Ulquiorra, though Ichigo did get stronger with every fight. When Ulquiorra first met Ichigo and White was trying to take over, Ulquiorra noticed Ichigo's spiritual pressure fluctuate above his own, which points towards Masked Ichigo being above base Ulquiorra. You could argue Ulquiorra meant his full power, but I think Ulquiorra would have been way more shocked if Ichigo's Ryatsu at the time was fluctuating above his second Atapa form. Nell in her release state was able to beat on base Noritora, which gets her into this tier, and since her base form was close to Noritora's base, her release state should be close to his release state. Noritora in his release state was able to hold his own against a Rancor or Kenpachi even with his eye patch off, and if the battle kept going on as it was, Noritora would have likely been the winner. An earlier version of Kenpachi with his eye patch on defeated Shinigami Tosen and fought Bankai Komomora until Komomora ran off to help Yamamoto, which should place released Noritora a level over Shinigami Tosen and above Komomora by an unknown degree. Rising up to the high captain tier, this tier is for the upper level captains in Espada. Wonder Weiss in his release state beat Bankai Kensei off screen, or at least it was likely in his release state as that's the form he shows up in after beating Kensei. He was able to do some damage to Yamamoto and regen from a full power strike from the head captain, with Yamamoto giving respect to his power, which should put him a level above Ione. Ulquiorra in his first release state was very clearly a tier above Masked Ichigo and would have instantly killed him had Ichigo not blocked with Getsuga. Ichigo said he didn't even know how it was possible to be that fast, and that was after Ichigo already saw base Dark move, so Ulquiorra in his resurrection is likely faster than base Dark. In this form, Ulquiorra can fire Cero Oscuros, which are an order of magnitude more powerful than regular Ceros. The top 4 Espada are the only ones not allowed to release under the canopy of Las Noches, which tells me they're a level above the other Espada. Holly-Bell in her release state should go above Ulquiorra as Espada 3. Upon transforming, she instantly one-shot an ice clone of Hitsugaya and probably would have done that to the real thing had Toshiro not taken precautions. Hitsugaya lasted a long time against her, but he had to avoid getting within striking distance of her as he was outmatched by her physically. Like I mentioned earlier, despite Holly-Bell initially getting frozen by Hitsugaya, she breaks out and fights him, Lisa, and Hiyori at the same time, and Hitsugaya was in his Bankai in the anime. If Holly-Bell's really stronger than Ulquiorra as her rank suggests, she pretty much has to be a level above Toshiro unless you think Hitsugaya is actually a stomp gap above Hollow Mask to Bankai Ichigo, which doesn't narratively make sense. Bankai Hitsugaya was already being overpowered by base Holly-Bell, and Hitsugaya noted how he was surprised by how much stronger Holly-Bell got from releasing. So really nothing else makes sense other than Holly-Bell in her release state being a tier above Hitsugaya, and Hitsugaya only being able to beat her with a one-off technique. Or the theory I presented earlier where Holly-Bell actually wasn't beaten at all and was just temporarily stuck. Shinji is the leader of the Vizards and was once Aizen's captain. In his base form, he blocked an attack from uncontrolled Hollified Kensei as well as from Mashiro, and Mashiro was able to disable Rose with one of her attacks. At the last moment, he dodged a sword swing from a serious Tosen while the sword was just millimeters from hitting him when he noticed, which would logically point to him being considerably faster. Shinji also fought Gin for an extended time base to base. He was able to repeatedly dodge attacks from base Grimmjow, and with his Hollow Mask on, he was able to overpower the Espada and almost blew him away with a Cero, which Grimmjow barely countered at the last second with a Cero of his own and still came out extremely injured, similar to what happened with Ulquiorra, but Shinji damaged him even more. What truly makes Shinji scary is his Shikai, which can flip the senses of his target, plus he can turn it on and off at will to throw them off even more. With this, he was able to land a blow on the mighty Aizen, drawing blood. He also took a strike from Aizen and didn't immediately go down. Since Shinji appeared to take Aizen's hit better than Holly-Bell, and Aizen seemed to consider him more worthy of his sword, I put Shinji over Espada 3. Baragon in his release state is Espada 2, but he doesn't need to rely on his number to get here as his aging power of Respira is busted. Anyone who comes in contact with his power ages to nothingness. Even Kido ages under his ability's authority. This makes him nigh untouchable and his attacks nearly impossible to stop. They even caught up to the speedster Soifone, so avoiding them isn't easy either. Not even Soifone's Bankai in an enclosed space could defeat him. The only thing that could beat him was his own ability. Stark and Lilynet were once one entity that was so powerful they soul crushed everything around themselves. When Stark releases, Lilynet joins back together with him and he likely regains this mighty power. In this form he shoots Ceros like a madman and was able to fight on par with Shikai Kyoraku. He even had Kyoraku thinking about going Bankai. Love and Rose jumped him, but Stark had the upper hand once he brought out his ultimate ability, which is essentially nearly unstoppable, heat-seeking exploding chunks of his soul shaped like wolves. Kenpachi Zaraki grows significantly throughout the series as he unconsciously put mental chains on himself as he's too powerful to have fun fights otherwise. In his initial appearance, he was still clearly a level above Shikai Renji as the Ichigo that beat Renji was no match for him, so he would go in the High Lieutenant tier. Once taking his eye patch off, which is only there to restrict his vision and eat away at his spiritual energy, he was able to cut buildings in half with the swing of his sword. This version of him lost to Shikai Ichigo, so he'd still only go at the top of the High Lieutenant tier, or maybe Zangetsu amping Ichigo in that fight actually pushed Ichigo to the low captain tier for that one clash. Regardless, we know he had to be weaker than Byakuya as Aizen stated as such. Every tough battle Kenpachi went through, a shackle on his power was released. So immediately after the fight with Ichigo, he was already considerably stronger, being able to beat Bankai Tosen and temporarily fight Bankai Komamura even with his eye patch still on. When fighting base Noitora, Kenpachi seemed to have the edge with his eye patch on, so after the Ichigo fight, Kenpachi was either at the top of the low captain tier or near the bottom of the mid captain tier. Once the eye patch was taken off, base Noitora stood no chance and had to immediately release. The fight between eye patchless Kenpachi and released Noitora was close, with Noitora seemingly having the edge, but that was because Kenpachi was only fighting with one hand. The second Kenpachi decided to use both arms, the fight was decided in one blow. So an all-out Kenpachi should go a tier above released Noitora, placing him in the high captain tier. This lines up with him chopping off the limbs of Espada Zero, and that was with his eye patch on, by the way, as Kenpachi got even stronger after the Noitora fight. He was presented as a rival to Byakuya at this time with his eye patch on, but was doing more damage to Yami, so he would go somewhere above Byakuya in the mid-captain tier. If eye patchless Kenpachi wasn't in this tier before, he definitely was during the Yami fight. Zaraki spent most of his fight with initial release Yami dominating him, so I think it's only fair to put him above that specific version of Yami, which should be above every other ranked Espada. Unless you think Yami just got his rank due to his potential to grow stronger with rage. Yami in his release state becomes Espada Zero, the strongest of the ranked Espada. Renji, Rukia, and Chad were helpless against his might, and even post-Ulquiorra fight hollowified Bankai Ichigo could barely nick him with his Getsuga. Kenpachi and Byakuya were bullying him, but in this state Yami's strength increases with his rage and he transformed again, getting even bigger. We don't get to see the fight, but it took both Kenpachi with his eye patch off and Byakuya working together to beat him, and they were both badly damaged. So Yami should be above them individually. Ichigo after his fight with Ulquiorra got a power-up, being able to block release Yami's strike with just his Bankai, dodge his strikes, and even cancel out his Sero Oscuras with Getsuga. Then he showed off his new hollified power by smashing Yami into the ground with Getsuga. It only nicked Yami, but as later revealed, Ichigo was at less than half power throughout this fight. Considering how well even regular Bankai Ichigo was doing, and how he only even got caught due to him being thrown off by his hollification not working, I have a hard time seeing a full-powered Hollow Mask Ichigo not being able to beat Yami at this point. At full power, he even managed to damage Aizen. Gin and Tosen were both implied by Aizen to be above the Espada, which is why I have both above Yami. Tosen in his release state was so powerful he could block Komamura's Bankai casually with a single hand and instantaneously defeat the behemoth. Gin with his Shikai cut Hiyori in half, and with his Bankai was beating post-Ulquiorra fight Bankai Ichigo, even while he was fully recovered and even while he was using his mask in desperation. Gin's Shikai can extend 100 sword lengths, while he initially claims his Bankai extends 13 kilometers at Mach 500. He later reveals to Aizen his Bankai stats were a lie, though the speed and distance must have still been great considering he could basically cut cities in half. What makes his Bankai most deadly is its ability to turn to dust while extending and retracting, and being able to leave behind a deadly poison inside those struck with it. He used this ability to blow apart a Transcendent Aizen. Had Aizen not been immortal, it would have been curtains for him. Yororichi is former captain of the 2nd Division and could outpace Byakuya with her flash step while carrying Ichigo. In her base form, she was able to beat on base Yami, though she hurt herself doing so, and Yami got back up with Kisuke having to step in to defend her. So in base form, she would go somewhere in the low captain tier. With Shunko activated, she was able to easily get the better of Soifone with her own inferior version of the technique. This would at bare minimum put her into the mid captain tier, if not the high captain tier. What really gets her into the high captain tier was how she was able to knock around Chrysalis Aizen, though she was only able to do so without destroying her limbs due to having anti-hero armor on. While it broke, the armor was still strong enough to block attacks from this powered up version of Aizen, and Yororichi claims she could have dodged his attacks if she wanted to. I think she's fast enough to beat Gin, and if she has anti-hero armor, she should be able to take down the top Espada. Though as a close quarters fighter, Bargun might beat her since he's a bad matchup for her. Ukitake was captain of the 13th Division and could stop Byakuya with one hand during the Soul Society arc. According to Yamamoto, Ukitake and Kyoraku were always in a class of their own, and when it came to battle, they were transcendent and no one could match either of them. Together, they were able to fight against Shikai Yamamoto. Ukitake's Shikai allows him to absorb and reflect enemies' energy attacks back at them. Kyoraku, the 8th Division captain, was able to fight on par with Release Stark using his Shikai, and while it seems like he might have been at a disadvantage at first, that's only because his sword is finicky and only decides to use certain abilities when it feels like it. Once Kyoraku's Shikai started using its child game abilities, he defeated the Primera Espada. Though to be fair to Stark, Kyoraku did land a surprise attack from behind before their final bout. The databook states if Kyoraku fights seriously, he's skilled enough to cut Stark down, and Stark himself wondered why he had to fight someone as strong as him. So I do think Kyoraku has the edge over Stark when he has access to all of his Shikai abilities. These spots only represent Kyoraku and Ukitake using their Shikai. Ishin was ex-captain of Squad 10 and was able to fight Aizen himself, flicking him through buildings and even having Aizen admit he was pushed to his limits as a Soul Reaper. If Aizen meant Ishin himself was the thing that pushed him past his limit as a Soul Reaper, Ishin would actually go up a tier. But it might have just been the accumulation of all of Aizen's battles up to that point. Ishin also arguably did the most damage against Chrysalis Aizen, being the one to crack his shell open with the Getsuga Tensho.
with Aizen even complimenting the attack, saying he understood it. In context, Aizen was probably talking about levels of Transcendence here and how characters a level below can't interact with the character above. So him saying he understood the attack likely meant it was so strong it was peeking into his level of Transcendence. Keep in mind, all of these feats are from Isshin not even using his Shikai. Kisuke was a former captain of the 12th Division and arguably the smartest character in the entire series. He was able to easily get the better of base Yami on multiple occasions and cut through Luffy's tentacles. With his mastery of Kido, he was able to restrain and bombard an Aizen evolving through the Hogyoku, and while doing so also plugged Aizen's spiritual energy vents to make him destroy himself with his own spirit energy. If Aizen hadn't fused with the Hogyoku, this would have defeated him. Though Aizen only let something like that land because of his overconfidence due to having the Hogyoku within him. Aizen also implied Kisuke was his equal prior to his transformation. Kisuke's sealing Kido is also how Aizen was ultimately defeated. Isshin seemed to have the attack power edge since Aizen acknowledged his attack while dismissing Kisuke's, but overall Kisuke seems to be a more well-rounded combatant than Isshin. Though I believe it would be a very close fight. This spot also only includes Kisuke's Shikai. Ulquiorra is the only Espada with a second Resurrection, and due to the line of him specifically pointing out Aizen, the guy who made the Espada rankings, has not seen it before, I believe this is a narrative implication Ulquiorra in this form is actually the strongest of the Espada. Ryu also made note on how his Ryatsu was different than anything he's ever felt before. Ulquiorra's placement as the strongest Espada is also backed up by his raw feats, being able to Perception Blitz Ichigo worse than we've ever seen, and with his Lanza del Relampago, create the largest explosion in the entire manga. The Lanza is a technique he can spam as well. Ulquiorra essentially killed Ichigo, with him only being saved by his secret protagonist power-up. Ichigo's new fully hollified form was clearly stronger than Ulquiorra, but Ulquiorra could still somewhat clash with it, and while Ichigo was distracted, Ulquiorra cut his horn off, which took Ichigo out of his transformation and ended the fight. Despite Ulquiorra's power, he claimed his most impressive ability is his regeneration, and he can regenerate any part of his body other than his internal organs. Ulquiorra in this form can definitely be argued a tier above his first release, but his only scaling feat in this form is beating an Ichigo he was already beating, so he was just left at the top of this tier for now. Heating up to the Captain Commander tier, these characters have power above that of a regular captain. Unohana was captain of the 4th Division, and I'll get into more on why she's in this tier in my next list, but for now I'll just mention how Kubo said Aizen chose not to fight her during the Soul Society arc as a fight with her would exhaust him. And unlike with Isshin and Kisuke, Aizen had her under Kyoko Suigetsu and was completely fresh. Aizen was ex-captain of the 5th Company turned leader of the Elevencores, claiming to possess spiritual energy at least twice that of a captain's. His raw power alone was enough to keep the Elevencore in line and took Haribel out with 2 casual strikes. Physically, he even eclipsed Komamura's Bankai. Just a finger could stop Bankai Ichigo's sword during the Soul Society arc, and even after the Ulquiorra fight, Aizen could still stop it with his bare hand. In that first encounter, Aizen implied he could have cut Ichigo in half had he calculated his strength correctly. His failed Hado 90 with only a third of its normal destructive potential was enough to one-shot Komamura. Aizen's speed is just as impressive as his strength, Perception blitzing Ichigo just like second Etapa Ulquiorra managed to do. His spiritual power was so high, he was able to negate Soifon's double tap ability. Yamamoto using Hado 96 and sacrificing his arm barely did any notable damage, which to me solidifies Aizen in the same tier as Yamamoto. Multiple statements hype up Aizen as a Soul Reaper without equal, and Ichigo thinks that might have even been his motive for doing what he did. Aizen's scariest ability is his Kyoku Suigetsu, which allows him to impose perfect illusions upon anyone who's seen his sword release. Using this ability, he was able to take out Kyoku, Hitsugaya, Komamura, Soifon, and the Vizards while they were all coming at him at the same time. Yamamoto, the head captain of the Gotei 13, was so powerful it was stated that even 2 captains might not be able to beat him, which seems to be an indication he and Aizen are on that similar 2x captain level. Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka, is stated to be the most powerful Zanpakuto, and Aizen flat out concedes he would probably lose a 1v1 against him due to this. To nullify this, Aizen created Wonderweiss, who had to sacrifice his intelligence to be a special counter to it. After Yamamoto defeated Wonderweiss, all the contained flames within the Ironcar's body were going to erupt, and Yamamoto stopped the blast with his own body. Aizen said the flames would have easily blasted away the barrier the Shinigami put up, turned Karakura Town to ash, and even went as far as saying Yamamoto saved the world. Ichigo in his fully hollified form was a clear level above Ulquiorra in his second release state, countering his Sero Oscuros with a regular Sero, catching and crushing his Lanza with his bare hand, slicing off his limbs, and blowing away his organs. It's hard to compare his powers to Aizen's and Yamamoto's, but when Ichigo defeated Ulquiorra, most of his cloak was already destroyed, so based on Unohana's statement, this Ichigo should have been at less than half power. At full power, I think Ichigo is very likely to have power surpassing the others in this tier. This form is seemingly half the power used by Zangetsu to train Ichigo while in the Dangai to attain his form that surpassed Aizen. Aizen also said Ichigo temporarily transcended the boundary between Soul Reaper and Hollow before trading his spiritual energy for physical strength, which Ichigo didn't actually do, but regardless, this makes it seem like Ichigo's full Hollow form might actually be a being of transcendent power. This is backed up by post-Ulquiorra fight Ichigo being the only one who could sense Transcendent Aizen. Ichigo's power could still be sensed by others though during the Ulquiorra fight, so at least this weakened version of him wasn't at that level. Unohana noted how even at less than half power, Ichigo had the spiritual energy of a captain, which could be pointing towards him having that 2x captain level Ryatsu. And that was just while in his base Bankai state. This, along with Ichigo being the only one who could sense Transcendent Aizen, seemed to point towards Ichigo's full power being above standard captain level. In the Hellverse movie, Full Hollow Ichigo was able to cut chains that Yamamoto thought were absolutely uncuttable. And while the movie isn't canon, it's one of the only official comparisons we have between the two. Breaking the boundary between Soul Reapers and Hollows, we've reached the low Transcendent tier. Aizen in his chrysalis form was able to easily beat Kisuke, Isshin, and Yoruichi at the same time. After coming out of his chrysalis, his power goes up again and he was able to destroy the Kototsu, which is a creature of reason that isn't something spiritual energy can handle. His spiritual pressure was so powerful, humans were crushed by him just walking by, and Don Kanonji's cane vaporized on contact. Transversing to the next level of Transcendence, Aizen, after transforming into his butterfly form after Gin blew him apart, thanked Gin for allowing him to become a being that transcends both Soul Reapers and Hollows.
This means this new form is likely on another level compared to the last one.
In this form, he could rip up the landscape with his swings, and a fully chanted Hado 90 from him can create a torrent of gravity so strong it distorts space and time. After getting humiliated by Ichigo, in frustration he evolved again and could create energy attacks strong enough to damage Ichigo, who was in his own transcended state. Reaching an even higher dimension, Ichigo, after training in the Dangai, reached an even higher transcendent level than Aizen, to the point Aizen couldn't even sense him and started coping, thinking Ichigo discarded his spiritual pressure for physical strength. When he and Aizen clashed, they destroyed a mountain, and Ichigo revealed that it was actually his sword that did that. He could catch Aizen's full power swing with his hand and swat away his fully chanted Hado 90. Even though Aizen's final form could damage his arm, Ichigo smacked away an attack that was made up of 12 of those attacks that hurt him, and Aizen still couldn't sense Ichigo. So Ichigo still should be a transcendent level above him. Final Getsuga Tensho Ichigo becomes Getsuga itself, and releases all of his power in one attack, sacrificing his Soul Reaper powers. His Mugetsu cut Aizen down the middle and would have ended him had he not been immortal. It did make Aizen temporarily weak enough for Kisuke's Sealing Kido to take effect. That's the end of my Bleach Strength and Power tier list, at least the first part. Make sure you subscribe to catch the future lists. As you can see, my ranking abilities are transcendent above both weeaboos and power scalers. I'll keep making videos until I'm taken to the Soul Society.